Welcome back to Orange Hat Reviews, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. So, episode 18 of the Mystery Reviews. I gave the hints over the week, and my hints were Madison Square Garden and Toledo, Salamanca. And then I gave a final third hint, which was Kastagir. Sorry about that, Epi. I had to take care of something, shall we say. But yes. And Epi, in the comment section, put down the lyrics to one of the best songs in the movie, which was Who Wants to Live Forever. So, yes, a couple of people have actually guessed. It is indeed Highlander. And I do want to thank Mara for lurking. She's taking a nap because, well, she had a very busy night. So have a good sleep, Mara. And the movie Highlander with Christopher Lambert. I got my talking points up over here. Christopher Lambert, Roxanne Hart, Sean Connery, Clancy Brown are the four main players in this movie. And you have a lot of other good actors too in this that a lot of people don't realize that John Toledo is actually in this movie. John Toledo has had roles in a slew of other productions. I believe he died back in 2016, so rest in peace to him. He played the bald detective, Bedsell, in this movie. So this movie does start off, and I'm going over the director's cut, folks, because I don't have the theatrical. I have the director's cut because the director's cut is the best cut, in my opinion. All good. Never miss a chance to be a smartass. Yep, there you go. And the beginning of this movie has a great narration from Sean Connery's character, Ramirez. From the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries, living many secret lives, struggling to reach the time of the gathering, when the few who remain will battle to the last. No one has ever known we were among you until now. Now, then it opens to Queen's music, Princes of the Universe. Queen and Highlander are inseparably linked. They are, looks like I have a bad internet connection. Well, I'm going to wait for that to slow down or to get back up, whichever it is. There we go. But yeah. So now that the internet is back, sorry about that, folks. So yes, it goes, or a Scotsman playing an Egyptian teaching a Frenchman playing a Scotsman. This level of cultural appropriation has never been seen since. Dude, yeah, call it what you want, but yeah, I don't see it as cultural appropriation, but I do see it as funny. So yeah, with that said, I actually now have a nice setup here. I got a nice desk, chair, whatnot. So this is actually my first live stream that I'm not sitting on a bed or in a chair on a front porch or anything. I'm actually in my room. Sorry about the wall over there and the purple walls. This wasn't my choice when I moved in. So yeah. But anyway, this is my new setup. This is how I'm going to be doing streams from now on, or until something changes. But yeah, this house is 100 years old. But getting back to the crux of the stream, my review for Highlander, the casting choices in this movie were actually all very well thought out and very well done. Christopher Lambert did a very good job. Now, something that a lot of people don't understand, or actually don't really catch, is that Mcleod Christopher Lambert's character is 18 years old and died at the age of 18. That patch in the wall over your shoulder, yeah. Missing some paint makes me want to pick up the sandpaper and paintbrush and get to work. Yeah, I know. This is older wallpaper, and for some stupid ass reason, I'm not going to get into it actually, because I'm not going to speak ill of the dead on stream. But yeah, not much I could do about it except for maybe, nope. There, how about that? So yeah, all the cast members, and Connor Mcleod is 18. He was born in 1518, and he died in 1536 for the first time. And a lot of people don't understand that, or don't actually catch that. And it's like, Christopher Lambert playing an 18-year-old. Weird. So yeah, aside from that small detail, this movie does have some pretty good sequences in it. It is, or I'll give the scores later on, as I am going to make a habit. And also, let me get back to my talking points. Jeez, if I don't have my talking points, I start going off on tangents. So the beginning of the movie goes through Princes of the Universe and then goes into Madison Square Garden with wrestlers entering the ring. And the camera shot that goes all the way through Madison Square Garden, down to the wrestlers, and up to the stands where Connor is sitting, where Connor is remembering the battle of the Mcleods versus the Frasers. And he's reminiscing about that time, and he then senses another immortal. For those of you who are not don't have know-how of Highlander or its series or the movies, when immortals are in a certain proximity to each other, they can sense each other to basically warn them that another is nearby. It's a sixth sense, extrasensory kind of perception, really. And so Connor, instead of listening to the guy jabbering to him, who is a huge wrestling fan apparently, decides to go down to the garage. Lambert was 29 playing 18 years old. Insert how do you do, fellow kids? Yeah, I know, right? And so he goes down to the garage and he's looking around, and this guy comes up behind him, and that guy's name is Facile. And he's like, Facile, wait. So then right off the bat, like 6 or 7 minutes in, this movie is already having a huge sword fight between Facile and Connor. Connor has his katana with the dragon's head, and Facile has a Toledo Salamanca broadsword. So that is one of the hints. Also, Madison Square Garden was one of the hints. So I basically gave you a hint of the beginning of the movie, so anybody who saw it would actually understand it. Now, the fight is actually pretty well rehearsed, except that there is some cutting issues in the Madison Square Garden, especially in the director's cut, because the director's cut doesn't really, or the theatrical doesn't really show the parts that do slightly confuse the audience a little bit, because this guy, Facile, basically is immortal, and yet you see that he's kind of up there in age, but you also get the sense that he's very limber, because there's a sequence where he's doing backflips out of screen, and where he's just doing a bunch of backhand flips, and it's like, And then you also see, or it then cuts to him not doing backflips, but then him cutting back to backflips. And it does make one confused. Like, was this just some random guy in the garage just doing backflips? Or is this the guy that's fighting Connor, you know? And it does actually put some stakes to it because Connor does lose his sword and Fazil's looking for him. And then he comes up behind Fazil and quickly disarms him. I want someone to redo the skit of more cowbell, but switch it to be more flippy flips for the choreography in the damn fight scene. Yeah, I have no idea what that means, but skit of more cowbell. I don't know what that means. Sorry, bud. But yeah, so then Connor cuts off his head. In the movie, compared to the series, you don't see the heads getting cut off in the series. In the series, when they do a decapitation, you hear like a thunder or a thunder roar, like a boom kind of sound for when they decapitate somebody in the series. But in the movies, they show the heads fly off. They show the heads go clean off, and it is so freaking awesome. So then, when an immortal cuts the head off of another immortal, they obtain their knowledge and their strength and their power through what is called a quickening. And in the show, they have it as sort of lightning forking into somebody, or pure white lightning or flowing into a person and also affecting the area around them. Where in this one, it's kind of like a bright light for Connor Mcleod. When he gets this quickening, it does affect the area around him because it is energy. And I do like how it forks out of Fazil's body and it affects the... And I got to respond to somebody else who I got a text from. There. So you hear Connor reacting. I mean, when you're getting a quickening, you are absorbing a lot of knowledge and a lot of energy. It can be painful, and it can be, as for Kurgan, sometimes it can be, what's the word? Euphoric. But it can also be painful for a moment. So, yeah. And Epi, I will check that out for after the stream. So Connor realizes that after all the stuff going down, plus the sprinklers going off at Madison Square Garden, well, the police are automatically alerted, so he knows he cannot leave that. He cannot leave Madison Square Garden with his sword. So he tosses his sword up on a small grate above him. And he then gets into his car and starts speeding out of Madison Square Garden, but the police are also turning up there, and he accidentally smacks into one of them. Now the police, oh my God, dude, that is nuts. But before that, it also does take a small period or a small cut over to 1536, where Clan Mcleod is getting ready to go off the battle. How you doing, Metalong? They had production limitations, so they did what they could with what they had for the quickening effect. Exactly. This movie was, or you could tell that this movie had a very limited budget. However, that quickening with or Kurgan, or the quickening for Mcleod after he kills Kurgan, wow. But yeah, the brutality of the police. Holy crap, when they apprehend him, and the guy that arrests him, I believe, is named Garfield. He's like, "Give me your hand, give me it," and he just freaking backhands the cop. So they pulled guns on him. They pulled guns on him as he was leaving, and it's like, what the fuck, dude? And so they pull a gun on him again, and they're like, "Don't move, pal. Don't even breathe." So then you get the reminiscence to 1536 and the origin of Connor and the battle versus the Frasers, and Kurgan is also there. And Clancy Brown as the Kurgan is just a great freaking, how you doing, Masa? Is just a great freaking casting choice. He has a voice of a savage. Clancy Brown, his voice work in movies, the dude he is mostly known for the Kurgan, but he has also played in movies like Fly Away Home with Anna Paquin and Jeff Daniels up in Canada, where he plays just a friend of the family, and he even does that well. Clancy Brown has such range, but he's also mostly known for his voice being, kind of really gruff and whatnot. And yes, Clancy Brown is just OP as hell. Exactly. And he also does play the strongest immortal in the Highlander movie. The Kurgan has always gone after heads. He hasn't cared about the anonymity that is required. And so when he's dressed up as like the freaking, like a Black Knight, like a more primitive version of the Blackluster Soldier from Yu-Gi-Oh! Holy shit, dude. This guy has a freaking humongous skull, like a huge cat skull on his head. And even the lower jaw is covering his face too. And you just get the feeling that this guy is not one you want to mess with. And so the Frasers have a deal with the Kurgan, because you see him and he says there's one called Connor among them. And remember our deal, the boy is mine. Now, and on SpongeBob, I can't explain. Are you telling me that Clancy Brown is in SpongeBob SquarePants? Because if that's true, that's creepy as hell. That is fucking creepy, dude. So then Kurgan, or everybody in the battle versus the Frasers, the people are actually, they see Connor, it's like, no, that's Connor Mcleod, leave him alone. And he's literally trying to get people to fight him. He's like, fight me, damn you, fight me. Oh my God, he actually is in SpongeBob. That is creepy. And he's like, and he even says, he's like, they all run away. And then Kurgan shows up. He's like, fight me. And Kurgan just easily dispatches Connor. He stabs him in the side, twists it in. And before he could take his head, he actually gets stopped by Connor's cousins, Dougal and Angus. And he even says, another time, Mcleod. Now, for those of you who are unaware, if you do cut off an immortal's head who hasn't been immortalized yet, who hasn't attained their immortality through dying for the first time, you can still gain a quickening. So the question is, how did he know about Connor before Connor became an immortal? That is one thing that actually always did bother me. But Kurgan is also the strongest. He's also in the know, so to speak, with certain things. And he's lived a great life, or a longer life. So we then cut to Connor being apprehended and questioned. And I love how that interrogation goes. And you also get Brenda Wyatt, who's at the who's a forensic analyst, finds the Toledo Salamanca. Hey, Jay, M21, 2021, how's it going? And she's like, and they're like, what you got there? A Toledo Salamanca. And they're like, oh, what? It's a sword, Frank, a very rare sword. Yeah, expensive, only about $1 million. Maybe they went or all connected in a way never really explained. That is also a possibility, because it is sort of established in a way. There's a lot more mythology to the movies than the series. The series does not have nearly the amount of mythology that the movies do, where Connor Mcleod is so powerful that when he, or even before Kurgan, even before his battle with Kurgan, he's powerful enough to really sense how animals are feeling. He's powerful enough to really put even animals in their place, because there is a shot at the zoo, which I'll get into later. We are discussing Highlander, the original Highlander film, the director's cut specifically. And so they interrogate Connor, who's going by the name Russell Nash, because honestly, if you are an immortal, you don't want to carry the same name through time, because it would make a lot of people suspicious, you know? So he's asked a question, and one of the cops is like, "You talk funny, Nash. Where are you from?" "Lots of different places." And he's like, "You're an antique dealer, right?" "Yeah." "What's that?" And he puts the Toledo Salamanca on the table, and Connor's like, looks down, "A sword? Wise up, smart ass." I mean, you got 3 cops in there and whatnot, and he's like, "Okay." "Or it's a Toledo Salamanca broadsword worth about $1 million. So you want to hear a theory?" "Mm-hmm." "You went down to the garage to buy this sword off this guy. What's his name?" "I don't know. You tell me." "Okay, his name is Amon Fazil. You argued about the price of the sword. You cut off his head." And he laughs at it. He's like, "You want to hear another theory? This Fazil was so upset about lousy wrestling tonight. So in a fit of depression, he went down to the garage, and in a fit of depression, he cut off his own head," which causes one of the detectives to laugh. And it's like, he's like, "That's not funny, dude." And so the cop who's talked to him, Garfield, he's like, "You faggot, Nash?" "Yes, I said that word because it's a direct quote, people. It's a direct quote in the movie." And he's like, "Why, Garfield? You cruising for a piece of ass?" And Nash is just a real aggressive cop. So he's like, "I'll tell you what happened, Russell. You went down for a BJ. You just didn't want to pay for it." And so he calls him a sicko and whatnot. And so the cop tries punching Nash, and Connor just frickin' ducks the punch and shoves him up against the wall. And they break the fight up, and he's like, "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet." "Then we're through." "Hey, Nash, we're just getting started." So then it cuts immediately to the Kurgan arriving in New York. But I also did skip over one part where Connor was killed. He did have a woman who fancied him. Her name was Kate in Glenfinnan. And she gave him flowers before he went off to battle, and then he returned dead, and she was weeping over him. And his cousin Angus is like, "He's a Highlander, for God's sake. The last thing he wants to hear is a wailing woman." And you really do get the fact when they go back in time, they really have dressed for it. You really do get that this is in fact the time period that they go back to, and they do it well. So you get another theme from Queen. Most of the songs in this movie are Queen songs, because Queen, like I said, they're inseparable from the movies and series. So there's a report that this actually ties into the song itself, where Madison Square Garden had another headless victim tonight, just like the one in New Jersey, because there's also a body that was beheaded in New Jersey. And they even asked Connor in the interrogation, "Have you ever been over to Jersey, Nash?" "Not if I can help it." Because there is a string of headhunt or people getting their heads cut off. So now the world is aware that there are some sickos out there who are cutting people's heads off, you know? So then they're like, "A body which this time has no name." And then you hear Kurgan say, "I know his name." And then you hear Kurgan's theme, "Give me the prize," being sang. And so Kurgan, going under the guise Victor Kruger, goes into a little dive hotel, and he's like, "Okay, Victor Kruger, and I'm going to hit you up for a 20 in advance." So he flips him a 20. He's like, "Well, if there's anything you need, broads, a blow, just dial O." And so you then see Kurgan in his room. He opens up a suitcase which has his sword in it, and he assembles his sword. This sword is freaking awesome. I'm actually going to try to bring up the sword, or Kurgan's sword, for you guys to actually see, because this sword is pretty cool. The motel reminded me of the first Terminator movie so much. In a way, it kind of did. All right, so images. Holy crap, you can actually buy his sword. I might look into that. Okay, so this is his sword. Now let's do a little screen sharing. Window, Chrome tab. This is the sword. And let me pull. There we are. So yeah, this sword right here. Let's see if I can actually oops. There we go. So these spike areas here, in this area, they actually slide into the crossguard of the sword, and they can actually flip or slide outward at the push of a button. And he actually assembles the sword, as it can be seen right here, where you get the pommel, the crossguard with the slide outs, and then one half of the blade and the other half of the blade. And while he's assembling this sword, you get the you get a little montage of him using the sword, swinging it, and doing like a sword kata. And you see just how well he is with this sword, how skilled he is. And then you hear him say, "At last, the gathering," and then he he slides up the spikes. And then we get a prostitute who walks in. "Hi, I'm Candy." And and you see him looking sideways. He's like, "Of course you are." And well, we all get the idea of what's going to happen there. After watching a few dozen Forged in Fire swords or episodes, I don't see that sword surviving the strength test with that blade being into. Honestly, you are right. The blade, or it wouldn't survive very long. But for functional purposes and for movie purposes, it's movie magic. What can you say, you know? So, moving on, forensics gets a little bit of the metal from the dead guy. And so Brenda Wyatt, who's the forensic analyst, checks the metal and finds out that the metal is around, it's 1980 or it's 1980s in this movie. So 1985, it's actually the year I was born. So 85 to 593 BC. So that would make it over 2,000 years old, 2,000-year-old metal. And she also had a readout that said that the metal was folded over 200 times. And you learn that Brenda Wyatt is a sword aficionado, so to speak. She is an expert on sword crafting and whatnot. She wrote a book about it, which comes to play in this movie. And so when she does, or she goes to the Madison Square Garden after she finds this out, you know, after she's off shift, and Connor Mcleod is following her. But she also went back to the garden to see if she can gather more of that metal, which she did. She even used a metal detector and whatnot. So then she's at a bar, and she orders her usual, and then Connor orders a very Scottish sounding drink. I cannot remember what he ordered, so forgive me on that. And then he says, "You go to the garden often?" And Brenda hears him say that, and she's like, "Excuse me?" And so he's like, "Hmm?" And she comes over. "What'd you say?" "Madison Square Garden. You go there often?" "Why?" "Wrestling, basketball, sports, or parades and whatnot." And she's like, "Have you been following me?" "I would really like to walk you home, Brenda." He's basically wanting to explain to her that this isn't a world you want to get into. So she's like, "I can take care of myself." So she pays her bill and leaves. And then he leaves and she starts tailing him. Well, while he's tailing him, you then see Connor looking around and whatnot. So you know there's another immortal around. He can sense another immortal. And then he also knows that she's following him. So he grabs her, holds her mouth shut, and he's like, "Quiet." And then you just see Kurgan just pop up swinging his sword at them both. And it's like, oh, shit. And we get the whole... Hold on one moment, folks. Sorry about that. Anyway, he's chasing Connor around, and he's swinging a sword at him. Connor doesn't have his sword. He didn't expect he needed it at the point. So the fight is interrupted by the police. And Kurgan, or it's a pretty even fight, so to speak, because Connor does get a metal bar and starts smacking Kurgan around with it, but Kurgan easily disarms Mcleod and starts kicking him around and whatnot. But then the police show up in a helicopter and they're like, drop the swords, and they have to run and they have to get away from the police. So then Brenda asks him, he's like, who the hell was that? He called you Highlander. What does that even mean? There could be only one what? Listen, lady, I want, and shut up. Don't ever follow me again. You have only one life. If you value it, go home. And it's pretty sound advice if you're doing something that you don't, or if you're in the middle of something you don't understand. But she's an inquisitive kind of person, you know? So now we get another reminiscence to Connor being alive, and his cousins are saying, "You saw the wound. He should have died. It's not natural." I say he has the devil in him. And back in more primitive times, that was basically the case for many immortals who came back to life, including his cousin years later, Duncan Mcleod, who came back to life after dying the first time. His clan banished him and thought it was witchcraft. Well, that's basically what it was with this one. His clan feared he had the devil in him. And Connor even asks his cousin, he's like, "Would you rather I was dead?" And Kate, his lover, says, "It's not natural. He's in league with Lucifer." "Don't say that." "I'll say it. You have the devil in you. We've been kinsmen for 20 years. And Dougal, his cousin, who was his best friend, he's like, "Connor Mcleod was my kinsman. I don't know who you are." Now, Angus, who had more of a level head, he's like, "You better go, Connor." And so when he said, "I'm not going anywhere," they smashed his head with a mead gourd or a mead jar. And then you see him being stoned at, and he has this huge tie up where his arms are like this, and across his back, he's tied up to that, and he's being basically tortured because of him, or people thinking he's the devil. They're calling for him to be burned, and they're stoning him, hitting him, beating on him. And then Angus comes in. He's like, he's your cousin, or because Dougal actually starts beating on him. And Angus comes in. He's like, "He's your cousin, man." But yeah. And so Angus stops it and he's like, there'll be no burning here today. We will banish him. And Kate, for some reason, who loved Connor, is like, no, burn him. And he then asks Connor, he's like, can you walk? I'll bloody well walk out of here. Then go while you still can. And Connor won't forget that kindness. He's like, I'll never forget you, Angus. And Angus gave him a small smile to let him know that Angus still cared for Connor, even though what happened is supernatural to them. So 5 years later, because they covered the whole time, or the whole passing of time, with small cuts in between, where Brenda goes to the police investigating the Madison Square Garden incident, and she's wanting to take the lieutenant out for lunch just to, talk shop and whatnot. So then she goes back and sees that the guy that she just ran into was also a suspect in the case, Connor Mcleod. So Connor gets to his house and starts using his, or after he retrieved his sword from Madison Square Garden, that's why he was at the garden where Rachel showed up, or Brenda showed up, rather, sorry. And he then starts sharpening his sword, and he hears, or he sits down, or no, I'm sorry, I'm remembering this out of sequence. He goes back to his house and he sits into his antique room. And when he's in the antique room, you hear metal banging, and then he's back in ancient Scotland, and this time it is 1541, where it's been 5 years since his banishment. He has a wife named Heather, and he has a nice, kind of like a castle, or he has like a whole castle silo kind of dig, which is pretty cool. And he also has a shop where he's doing horseshoes and whatnot. And you see that he's living a nice life after his banishment. And this is when Ramirez turns up, Sean Connery. And he comes in looking like a swashbuckler from from all sorts of different ages. And he's like, good evening. I am Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, Chief Metallurgist of Charles V of Spain. Who? And I'm at your service. And he's like, what do you want? You're Connor Mcleod. Maybe I am, and maybe I'm. You're Connor Mcleod, born in Glenfinnan and killed in 1536, to where you were banished. And so after he says that, Connor starts feeling ill. And he tells Heather to go back into the house, basically. And when she refuses, he has to basically go in a route that he doesn't like. Do as I say, woman. Which back then, if the woman didn't do what she said, there's consequences for that kind of behavior. So then Connor finally undergoes a quickening, or the sensation he feels, where it shows that he's kind of getting struck by lightning. Now, one of the objective flaws is that they reuse certain sound effects and certain audios that the actor does. What's the actor's name who played the original Highlander? Christopher Lambert. So yes. Now then Ramirez tells him, we're the same, Mcleod. We are brothers. And then we go back to the scene where Connor does get a sword, and he does, or it's a sword that Ramirez actually has in the past, because back then Connor had his family sword, his family's long sword. So let's see here. Ramirez shows up to explain the rules of immortality. The scenes are awesome. The cuts between present and past do nicely to keep the main story relevant. So then in 1541, when Ramirez is teaching Connor and basically giving him lessons, he has him on a boat and he's teaching him about balance. He's like, I don't like boats. I don't like water. I'm a man, not a fish. He's like, and so he's like, you complain endlessly. And he's like, and then he calls, and he's like, I cannot swim, you stupid haggis. Haggis? What is haggis? Sheep's stomach with meat and barley. He's like, what do you do with it? You eat it. How revolting. Shoot. He's like, and then he sneezes and he's like, be still, you'll tip us over. So, I cannot swim, you Spanish peacock. I'm not Spanish, I'm Egyptian. You said you were from Spain. You're a liar. And so Sean Connery just has the best lines. He's like, you have the manners of a goat, and you smell like a dung heap, and you have no knowledge whatsoever of your potential. Now, get out. He swings the boat to cause Connor to dip over. And he's like, help me, I'm drowning. You can't drown, fool. You're immortal. Now, this is where the mythology differs from the series. You can drown you can drown as an immortal in the series, where in the first movie, immortals can actually breathe underwater because Connor is drowning and then he's like, I can breathe. I'm not dead. I'm alive. Can't breathe. And so he starts laughing underwater, and then he's like, I'm going to slice you in two. And he goes up, takes a swing at Ramirez, who's no longer there. And then you see the blade drop on the back of Connor's head, and he's like, crude and slow, Klansman, your attack was no better than a clumsy child. And then he whips his sword, and then he does a quick little disarmament. He's like, this can't be. This is the devil's work. Yes, Christopher Lambert played Raiden in the original Mortal Kombat movie back in the mid-90s. You are correct. And Ramirez is like, you cannot die, Mcleod. Accept it. And Connor does a little laugh, and then he's like, I hate you. Good. That is a good place to start. So then you go through the whole training montage, as most heroic movies do. And you see how he progresses with sword. And some of the fight sequences are pretty freaking good, where they're fighting in the woods and Ramirez takes a swing at him and he ducks it and he starts laughing, but then you hear the creaking of wood next to him and he sees a huge log or the tree comes and falls on him. And Sean Connery's like, oh, it's so great. The entire montage is just so great. And you see how well they're learning and you hear the narration. You are safe only on holy ground. That is our refuge. No immortal will dare violate that law. If your head comes from your neck, it's over. And he tells him, or he also has him, he's like, now for the last test. And they're on the beach. And they see a stag. Now, he's like, close your eyes. Trust me. Feel the stag. Feel his heart beating. His blood coursing. Feel. And then he just starts running and he's like, come on. And you see that Connor suddenly starts feeling, you hear the heartbeat and whatnot. And he's saying to himself, I feel him. And then you see the stag running and then he runs and he outruns Ramirez and they start running and whatnot. How you doing, Kamen Rider? You made it. Lambert was also great in the Fortress movies, though you will be faced with some full frontal male nudity in the first film. Well, you see a lot of that shit in other movies as well, dude. So, Adrian Paul's TV series version of Highlander is one I'm most familiar with. Never saw the other ones. Believe it or not, the very first episode of the Adrian Paul series of Highlander actually had Connor Mcleod in it. Christopher Lambert. It's basically kind of a passing of the torch sort of movie or a series. So yeah, so then while they're reveling in their immortality and jumping off cliffs into the water and whatnot, and then you also get a nice helicopter shot of them practicing sword fighting on a huge rock ledge, and Connor whips or disarms Ramirez, and Ramirez is looking down. He's like, "How the hell am I supposed to get my sword?" And it's just such a great shot. So then you hear the negative parts of it, where they're at a little market area and festival. And Connor says, he's like, "But what I want is a family. We cannot have a family. You can't have a family. We cannot have children." And the series was good, but the movies made after, oh my God, they were ugly. Yes, Endgame and The Source were not as good as the Christopher Lambert movies, but they were made in order to give Christopher Lambert's character Connor some closure, or a closure and ending, and then give Duncan the prize. That was basically the whole. It was always going to be a Mcleod that got the prize. Now, the ups and downs of immortality, basically, I have them listed here. You can't die. Holy ground is your refuge, and you gain the power and knowledge of those you kill, who are other immortals. The downs, you will lose those you love. You cannot have children. People in ancient times will fear you out of ignorance. And Ramirez also tells him about the gathering, where we will fight for, or where the few of us who are left will feel an irresistible pull to a faraway land, and there we will fight for the prize, to be the last one. In the end, there can be only one. He also explains about the Kurgan. When Connor first met Ramirez, he's like, "When we first met, you felt ill. That wasn't the first time you felt that sensation, was it?" He's like, "No. When the Mcleods fought the Frasers in that Black Night, I felt it then, except that it was more painful, more sensation." And he tells him, "That Black Knight is the Kurgan. He's the reason why I sought you out." And he explains who the Kurgan is, how they were a savage race where they would toss children in pits with hungry dogs to fight for food. I want to compare the quickening to vaccines, immortality at the cost of sterility, and social distancing. Epime, that is freaking great, dude. And yes, how you doing, Cayman? Good to see you. So when he explains to Mcleod after all that, and at the festival, he's like, "Mcleod, I have lived for over 2,000 years, and in that time I have had 3 wives. The last was Shikiku, a Japanese princess. Her father, Matsumune, created this," and he shows him the katana, "in 519 or 593 BC. When Shikiku died, I was shattered, and I would spare you that pain. Please let Heather go." And Connor doesn't listen to him. He hands him the sword and he walks off. So then we get the fight between Kurgan and Ramirez, because Ramirez was talking with Heather while Connor was out getting supplies, and that's when the Kurgan showed up. And he's looking for the Highlander, but Ramirez had prepared him for him. And Ramirez almost kills the Kurgan. He actually gives him the scar across his neck, which the Kurgan was famous for, because Ramirez's swordplay was a lot faster, and he actually managed to strike that blow and put Kurgan on the defensive. And then Kurgan's voice, which he's known for, that raspy voice, and that very growly, guttural, raspy voice. He's like, "You cannot win, Ramirez. I'm the strongest. My cut has improved your voice." Ramirez was always a person who was rather, shall we say, a smart ass. The concept of the quickening was also adopted in the Baldur's Gate RPG Series 2. I played BG first and saw Highlander later and realized that. Nice. The villain in Baldur's Gate 1 also seemed to have a design cues cribbed from the Kurgan. That's interesting. And it'd be cool to be immortal. It, like I said, Kamen Rider, it's up and down. Love Elizabeth Grayson as Amanda in the Highlander series. Thought she was so beautiful and got liked, and liked her character too. I love the character of Amanda in the Highlander. I had the biggest crush on Elizabeth Grayson when I was younger. The Highlander does show having the high ground is not the best position. Sorry, Obi-Wan. Indeed, the fight between Kurgan. This is where some of the more objective flaws come in with the battle between Kurgan and Ramirez, because the special effects were limited back then. Lennox is the one who sings "Sweet Dreams." Okay, what's going on about Annie Lennox here? What am I missing? When did Annie Lennox get brought up here? That wasn't Annie Lennox, the more you know. Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't Annie Lennox. Annie Lennox looks nothing like Elizabeth Grayson. Holy crap, man. I was just saying Amanda from the Highlander series looked a lot like Annie Lennox. Not in my opinion, dude. Not in my opinion. That wasn't Annie Lennox. They look nothing alike. The short hair is the only thing that they have alike. But yeah. So, yeah, as I was saying, the sword fight between Kurgan and Ramirez, when the Kurgan smacks the walls, you can actually sometimes see the steam jets blow some steam to blow the walls out. And it's like, yikes. And that scene, while it's good to watch, don't get me wrong, folks, that's always great to watch. Then we get Kurgan finally getting Ramirez stabbed and sliced down because he uses brute force and slices him across his chest and then stabs him in the back. And he's like, "Who's the woman? She's mine." Well, not for much longer. "Tonight you sleep in hell." And then he cuts off his head. You actually see a wide shot where his head just goes flying. And then the Kurgan gets the quickening from Ramirez. Now, while Heather is looking up, she then sees Kurgan or lightning strike the stairs under Kurgan, which the storm basically shattered most of the home, except for those stairs, which made it a more dramatic event, you know? I'm thinking he was referring to Highlander, the Raven series version, Amanda, when she had bleached white hair. Yeah, I'm guessing that is probably what you're referring to, Epi. So then Kurgan falls and Heather's looking amongst the rubble, but Kurgan gets up and, well, we learn later that he indeed raped Heather after he killed Ramirez. So then we get back into the present, where Brenda comes looking or asking about the previous night, and she goes to Connor's shop, and you are introduced to another character, Rachel, who we learn will know or knows about his immortality. So because believe it or not, Rachel was actually, it was implied that Rachel was his adopted daughter, even though she grew up to age past him. So she, or Brenda asks him, he's like, what could you tell me about a man hacking people's heads off in New York City, 1985? Not much. What about a Japanese sword that is over 2,000 years old, the metal in the blade folded 200 times? I don't deal with an exotic weaponry. How about some 18th century silver? So then after that scene where Connor and Brenda agree to have dinner together, we get a cut to the cops, and where the detective, played by John Toledo, Bedso, he's like, and I was looking there, and there's Brenda, our little Brenda. She was in Nash's office or place. She was talking to him. And they're like, what the heck is going on here, you know? So then later that night, Connor's preparing to go over to Brenda's place. And Rachel is looking at him. He's like, what are you looking at, Rachel? The eyes in the back of your head. People have been around asking questions. So what am I supposed to tell them? Tell them I'm immortal. And then you see the screen just shatter in front of you. Like your TV screen just shatters and it shows World War, I would guess it's more World War II, early World War II, because the Nazis are there. Or this is Connor. He's basically running to try to escape from the Nazis who are doing a village sweep. And he finds a young Rachel, his assistant at his antique shop. And he gets shot by one of the Nazis as he's carrying her away. And he comes alive, and she's like, you didn't die. Why didn't you die? And he's like, hey, it's a kind of magic. And then he disarms the Nazi and gets his gun. And the guy speaks in German. He's like, whatever you say, Jack, you're the master race. And then shoots the Nazi. So now you have some background on Rachel and Mcleod, knowing that how they know each other and how they met. And so she's trying, or she also tells him, she's like, you do know you can't fool me, right? He's like, what do you mean? This woman is special to you. You just don't want to admit it. Was he das? Or Nazi upon finding an immortal Frenchman. What's he das? Yeah. Amanda is hot, though, in my opinion. A beautiful woman. Elizabeth Grayson is way more attractive than Annie Lennox. Just saying. I actually would agree with that. Annie Lennox is hot in her own right, but Elizabeth Grayson is definitely hotter. So this whole sequence between Brenda and Connor, where Brenda loads a gun, a 45, and hides it, and then also starts a tape recorder as Connor is arriving, and he's like, good evening. Should we dine in the hall, or shall we step inside? So she brings him in. She's like, I forgot my earrings. Hold on one second. He also has a present for her, which is the size of a book, because he was also looking at that book. And he realizes that she does work for the police and whatnot. So she is putting on her earrings, and Connor looks around the place, immediately finds the gun, and as he's holding it up, I like your place, Brenda. And she's like, thanks, I only here for a few months. And then he's looking out the window, and he sees the cop that's been tailing him, Bedso. And you then see him lift up the other area where she hid the recorder. Interesting view. And she's like, what? I said, interesting view. Isn't it great? So he puts that down, and she comes out, and he's like, or they have a nice little talk. He's like, I have a gift for you. She's like, can I open it? If you like. And so she opens it, and she realizes it's her book, and she's like, you bastard, where'd you get this? I have an extensive library. Funny. your bio doesn't mention the Met. It says you worked in forensics, or with the police in forensics. Because he's like, where do you work and whatnot? And she says, at the Metropolitan Museum in Acquisitions. That would explain your liking for ancient weapons, especially the samurai, she says. And after he outs her, and he's like, are you and Moran trying to set me up? I don't work for Moran. And why is that bald policeman sitting outside your apartment? You know him. He's been tailing me ever since. So she looks back. She's like, what are you going to do? And then he turns around and says my favorite line in this movie. The question is, what are you going to do? You going to turn off the tape or shoot me with a 45? So while she's emptying the gun, she's like, I'm not looking for a murderer. Or I'm looking for a sword, the one used on Fazil. Why? Because I told you, because it's not supposed to exist. That blade was dated back to 600 BC. The metal in the blade folded 200 times. Now, the Japanese didn't start working on swords like that until the Middle Ages. So where the hell did it come from? And he's like, this is crazy. Wait, Nash, I want answers. Have you ever thought about anything else except for what you want? And then he leaves her. So we get another reminiscence after he leaves her place, because you hear Ramirez's voice, you must leave her, brother. No, yeah. And itchy back right now. So then you hear the song Who Wants to Live Forever, which Epi did a great job with the lyrics before the stream ever started. So it shows that Connor lives out Heather's life with her. He lives with her. They build a new home close to the old one, and she's getting older, or it shows the passage of time. And it shows her getting older and how Connor stayed with her even though she died of old age. She's like, I never understood why you stayed, and even though I grew older. And he's like, you are as beautiful as the day we first met. And she understood, and she's like, he is indeed saddened by her passing. And she comes up with a very touching request. She's like, will you do something for me, Connor? In the years to come, will you light a candle to remember me on my birthday? And he says, I will. And he does do that. Every year since she died, he has lit a candle for her in all the years that he lived. And you will also see it later in the movie. And so after she dies in his arms, he leaves the Highlands and burns his home. And he buries her with the sword, or with his Mcleod sword, the broadsword, as the marker for the grave. And then basically what people don't know is that he went to Japan afterward to learn about the swords, or to learn about the sword. Now, 550 odd candles, and they want to blame me using the wrong light bulb for global warming. Oh God, Epi. Dude, you're great. 5 viewers. Make sure you all smack that like button, please. It really does help the channel more than you know. Also, share the stream out to see if you guys can get some, or see if we can get some more people in here. I do love doing these versus streams because I have gotten feedback for being negative on my channel. So I do these versus, or not the versus streams, but the mystery reviews and the versus streams even, so that we could actually, or so that I do have a sense of positivity on my channel. I'm not always just a hateful individual, so to speak. So yeah, Continue. Please do smack that like button. Please also share the stream out. It helps get the channel. I just got up to 500 or 740 subscribers. I'm trying to get up there, folks. So any help is greatly appreciated. And the lighting just kind of dropped because clouds. God dang it. But anyway, we then go to the reunion with Kastagir. The third and final hint that I gave people, Kastagir is the name of one of the characters. How about Inuyasha versus Asta for the next versus stream? The next versus stream is this Friday, but I am taking requests. I don't know anything about Inuyasha or Asta, so that would take a lot of research, and right now that's why I have the stipulations that I need to know about at least one of the characters so I can actually come up with a comprehensive stream. Because life is, like I said, I'm living in a 100-year-old house and upkeep is constant. So I need to know at least one character. But thank you for making this suggestion, Cayman. It's just I don't know anything about him. So back to the movie. Kastagir is one of the immortals that knew Connor Mcleod in the past, and they have a nice, joyful reunion on a bridge. He's like, "So the gathering is here. Time seems to have caught up with us, has it? Well, maybe we could push it off for a few." He's like, "What do you think?" "I think we should have a party." He's like, "Oh no! Remember the last time we had a party? When was that?" "It was 1783. At 1783. "All right, your famous duel on Boston Common. And what was that man's name?" "His name was Bassett. Kind of like Basset Hounds." So then we get reminiscence to 1783. And what Connor's doing, he is drunk as a skunk in this scene. And he's supposed to be dueling this guy. And Mr. Bassett is one of those noble looking people. And he's like, "Just see if the imbecile is ready." Mr. Bassett is waiting, said, "Tell him I'm ready." And then he falls over. So then he gets stabbed in the duel and he falls over. He's like, "Oh." Then he's like, "You won, son." And then you hear, "Bassett, is that you?" He's like, "You missed him, Mr. Bassett." So Bassett stabs him a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time, and a sixth time. And then he stabs him a seventh time, and he's like, "Ah," and falls over again. And he keeps on getting up, and he's like, "Stop, sir, I beseech you. I'm sorry for calling your wife a bloated warthog, and I bid you good day." And that is the end of the sequence in the theatrical edition. But in the director's cut, you actually see Bassett's servant. He's like, "Shoot him, sir. Shoot him while his back is turned. Shoot him in the head." And he's arguing with Bassett, and Bassett doesn't want to shoot the guy or shoot Connor because, well, the duel's over and whatnot. He had his satisfaction. And so the guy arguing then causes Bassett to turn the gun on that guy, and he ends up shooting him. Asta was from Black Clover. I've never heard of Black Clover. So that was a nice little scene. And then we get another song or scene in the presence with a random guy who's like a Marine who was discharged for PTSD issues and whatnot. And he's a survival nut. And he's driving, or he has a freaking loaded Uzi freaking in his passenger seat, riding around listening to Hammer to Fall from Queen, another Queen song. And he comes across Kastagir and Kurgan fighting in an alley. And he's like, "What the hell?" And so he grabs his gun. He's like, "What the hell is going on?" And then after Kurgan beheads Kastagir, and you see that head fly too, the nut just guns Kurgan down with his Uzi. And everybody, or he was driving by a bunch of women and stuff, and there's like 20 witnesses to the quickening that happened, and also 20 witnesses that caught the guy shooting Kurgan, and then Kurgan stabs the guy because he gets back up and stabs him, lifts him up with the sword, and it's like, yeah, this is where some of the lesser special effects come in handy, because he then shucks the guy up against the wall, and then he receives the quickening from Kastagir. And this is a more explosive quickening because of where he is. He's in a lot of areas, or he's in sort of like an industrial area, and a lot of people see this. Family or an old couple stop their car to see what's going on. And funny thing, the old man in this movie, or in that car with his wife, his name is Frank Dukes. And I'm like, it's not the Frank Dukes in Highlander, or not the Frank Dukes that was part of the Kumite, was it? So I never really knew whether or not it was, but I could always look that up. And so after the Kurgan sees that he's drawn a crowd, he starts running toward the crowd with a sword, sees the car, cuts open the car's top, rips it up. The guy's smiling at him. He's like, so he rips that dude out of the car, tosses him off, and gets in the car with the woman, and he's like, Mom, boom. And then she starts screaming, and she stands up while the top of the car is off, screaming, help me, daddy, help me, daddy. This woman is like in her 60s, so it's ridiculous, but it's funny as hell. And so then he rounds a corner, and she's on the front end of the car, and it's like, oh, shit. So they end that and show the police going into the hospital. And they go to visit the guy who got stabbed by Kurgan. And Kurgan is the perfect example of chaotic evil. You are damn right there, Epi. Kurgan is he's just chaotic evil. He doesn't care about the drawing a crowd or anything like that. He will attack another immortal in the middle of frickin' Times Square if he senses them. That's who Kurgan is. You could have 1,000 people in Times Square. He would attack another immortal if he sensed them there. That's how Kurgan is. He's like he's the great white of immortals, the great white shark of immortals. He will just go after the food, you know? He's the strongest for a reason. So then they're talking to the survivor of the attack. The police are, and he's like, shows him, he's like, I understand you saw who the guy attacked, or who attacked you last night. He's like, yeah. And so he shows him a picture of Russell Nash, Connor Mcleod. He's like, is that him? Nope. Come on, man. It was dark in that alley. The freak was trying to kill me. The only rule Kurgan ever respected was holy ground. Yup. That was the only rule he ever respected. Now, he's like, this guy had a scar on his neck. That ain't him. And then he starts doing his little freak out. He's like, I had guns up the ass. I had ammo up the ass. And I can't protect myself. This man got up after I put enough lead in him to drop a rhino. And so he's like, can you work with one of our sketchers to put out a picture of this guy? Anything. And coppers, I know you guys think I'm nuts, but I need to tell you this last bit. And as he says, like, after he stuck me, that guy, and then it shows, or then it cuts away, but shows what the guy is saying, but you can't hear it. And you see that he is he's in desperation telling them this. And then after they leave, they're like, boy, this just went weird. He's like, look, we got to give a statement to the press. And I don't want to hear anything about sword fights in New York or people glowing in the dark. Because he told them basically what happened, that this guy started glowing in the dark and the whole sword fight thing. And so they get the headhunter exposed, and they show a drawing of the Kurgan, which it's a pretty good likeness of Clancy Brown's Kurgan thing. And then the cops are out, because the Headhunter 3 cops 0. And the hot dog vendor's like, what does incompetent mean? That man called me like 2 o'clock in the morning. What does baffled mean? And so the cop looks at him and it's like, oh my God, this is freaking hilarious, dude. So then we get Brenda investigating the truth about Connor Mcleod or Russell Nash, because she looked up, or she wants to know more about who Russell Nash is. So she goes to the Library of Congress and birth records and whatnot, and she looks up Russell Nash, and Russell Nash was born and died in the very same year. And this is something that a lot of immortals do. How you doing, Jack of all casuals? Good to see you. Still amazes me sometimes that the Kurgan also voices a beloved lobster in a kid's show. Yeah, I heard about that, how he is in SpongeBob SquarePants. So he's actually the fucking lobster. Wow. So Kurgan's mugshot gets passed around. Kurgan then gets a Tumblr makeover and showed up later looking like he has his pronouns in his bio. Yeah, that's basically it. So Brenda is looking up. So she goes to a doctor who delivered the kid, Russell Nash, and he's like, yeah, this was in Syracuse, and the mother died at birth. And she's like, so the baby survived? Yeah, for about a few minutes, and then he died right after she did. Russell Nash was dead. Yeah. Larry the Lobster. Okay. So then she goes to a records keeper who owes her a favor, and he's like, I looked up the thing you told me to, and I cross-referenced the property where you said Connor Mcleod's property, his home and antique shop. And he has so many different names. And then he's like, all these people or all these names are the names of children who died at or close to childbirth. And if you still have any doubts, watch this. He takes all the signatures of each of these characters or of each of these names, and there's a letter in each of these names that spells out Russell Nash, and also the handwriting matches up. He's like, here's what we got here, Brenda, is a guy that has been skulking around since the late 1700s, pretending to croak every now and then, and turning up, assuming the identities of children who died at birth. And she's like, that's not possible. So then we get to the very famous church scene and one of the famous Kurgan lines coming afterward. Connor goes to the church and lights a candle for Heather on her birthday. And he's like, and you Spanish haggis, watch out for her for me. Saying a prayer for Ramirez as well. Now, before I continue on, how Connor did the whole thing with kids, taking children's names who died at birth, that is also something that a lot of immortals do. It is one that is actually seen in the second season of Highlander, just before they leave Paris, where one of Duncan's friends needs a new identity, so Richie goes to a graveyard and finds a kid who died years and years ago, and she died 8 days, or she only lived for 8 days. So yeah, so he takes that name and they forge an ID for Duncan's friend, who's also immortal. So with that, that is a method that some immortals use in order to escape suspicion that they've lived for so long. So then Kurgan shows up while Connor is on holy ground, remembering his his first wife and first love. And you know it's Kurgan but they don't show his head. So he goes in, he does his cross, and then he kind of just does a little mock pray, and then he smacks out all the candle flames in a very disrespectful manner. And then he finds Connor and he's like, Kastagir is gone. Only you and I remain. And so he sits down, and then Connor turns around. He's like, nice to see you, Kurgan. And you see Kurgan mostly bald, but with a slight strip of hair. Who does your hair? I'm in disguise. This way no one will recognize me. I do. And you also see that Kurgan has frickin' safety pins over the scar of his neck. I'm like, ah, that hurts. Sorry, not lobster, I meant crab. Okay, that's fine. But, yeah. So, he's like, what do you want? Your head. And then he starts laughing and whatnot. He's like, Ramirez's blade didn't cut deep enough. He's right about you, or you are a slime. Ramirez was an effete snob. He died on his knees. I took his head and raped his woman before his blood was even cold. And this was when Connor turns to him, he's like, oh, I see. Ramirez lied. It wasn't his woman. It was your woman. And she never told you. And you want to know why? Perhaps I gave her something that you never could. And so Connor loses it. He grabs him by the jacket. He's like, and secretly, she yearned for my return. Holy ground, Highlander. And he gets up yelling. And, hey, it's the 80s. That was a badass as fuck. Well, yeah, it was back then. Holy shit, I'm not denying that. But it's also kind of creepy, too. Also, what he does with the nuns, he's like, happy Halloween, ladies. And then he starts flicking his tongue at them and whatnot. He's like, nuns, no sense of humor. I mean, he just, wow. And so he reminds Connor, he's like, holy ground, Highlander. Remember what Ramirez taught you. And Connor tells him, you can't stay in here forever. And he's like, you're weak, Highlander. You will always be weaker than I am. And Connor tells him, I'll be waiting outside. He's willing to fight Kurgan. They're the last two left. So there can only be one in the movie, you know. So then a priest goes up to Kurgan. He's like, this is a house of God. People are trying to pray and you're disturbing them. He cares for these mortals. He's like, of course he cares. He died for our sins. Well, that will be his undoing. And then he's like, Father, forgive me. I am a worm. And in the theatrical, it just shows him kind of crushing his hand, and then he does his famous saying. But in the director's cut, he actually licks up he licks the priest's hand and then crushes it. And he's like, I have something to say. It's better to burn out than to fade away. And then does a nice little gang signal or gang signs and all that shit. In the Endgame movie, they explore it a little, I think. So it was never explained what happens if they fight on holy ground. Actually, that is shown, or that is actually hinted at in Highlander 3. What happens on holy ground is if somebody is nearly beheaded on holy ground, a spiritual happening will happen, or will show them that you are on holy ground. This is not allowed. Also, one of the fighters' swords will explode or will shatter, which Connor's did in the third movie. Also, in the series, it was hinted that Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii went up because two immortals fought on holy ground. That was basically their reasoning for what happened. It is a law that shall never be broken. If you kill on holy ground, it is the biggest taboo. Now, there were other rules like only one-on-one, but Amanda actually violated that rule because she came up behind the fighter that Duncan was fighting and beheaded the guy. And it's like, oh shit. So, yeah, holy shit. Nice one, Jack. So then, Brenda confronts Connor. She's at his, she goes to the home or to the place of Connor and saying, I need to speak with him, goddammit. I'm sorry, Russell Nash isn't here right now. Rachel's trying to basically earn, she's like, Russell Nash is dead, Miss Ellenstein. And so he turns up, he's like, what are you doing here? I'm looking for a dead guy named Nash. He died at birth in New York, or in Syracuse, New York. And I'm like, wait, Syracuse? Holy shit. Because that's where my paternal side of the family mostly lives. So it was pretty cool to actually hear Syracuse mentioned in a movie, you know? So she's like, or he's like, looks at Rachel, and Rachel has a concerned look because she's realizing that this woman has just basically found out what Connor's doing. And so Connor leads her into the antique room. And she's like, oh my God, are the claymores real? All of this must cost a fortune. And he tells her, I've been alive for 4.5 centuries, and I cannot die. Well, everyone has their problems. And she notices he has a knife in his hand. What are you going to do with that? Take it. And then he tells her, I am Connor Mcleod of the clan Mcleod. I was born in 1518 in the town of Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel. And I am immortal. And then he uses her to stab him. Now, this is one of the things it's like, why does it always happen in the movies that every time Connor Mcleod outs himself as immortal, he ends up sleeping with the woman who discovers his own mortality very shortly after? Because that is exactly what happens. They basically have sex. There's a nice little sex scene right after it, because she just starts kissing on him after she realizes he's immortal. Exactly. She stabs him, he stabs her, all's well that ends well, you know? So then there's a scene afterward where now in the theatrical, it goes straight to Connor finding Brenda. Where in the theatrical, it shows that they're at the zoo. Brenda and Connor, or the director's cut, Brenda and Connor are at the zoo. And he's like, I can't get involved, Brenda. She's like, you're not listening. Or you don't want that life that I'm a part of. And so she's like, you know what? A lot of people have a problem or are afraid of love or are afraid to die. Your problem is that you're afraid to live. And so they walk away. And while they're talking about this, Kurgan is in the shadows watching them. And as she walks away, that's when he walks away, and Connor then senses him. And it's like, oh, crap. So then Kurgan kidnaps her, driving her around, and it is one of the most horrific psychological scenes because he is just torturing her. He runs people over. He's playing chicken with freaking trucks and whatnot. He then runs a motorcyclist off the road. He's just truly terrorizing her to the point where he's then singing New York, New York, the version that Queen sings, and she's telling him to shut up, and then she starts screaming for him to shut up, and then it switches over into Queen finishing out the New York song. And you then hear the message of Kurgan on Connor Mcleod's answering machine. He's like, and basically where you got to meet him, the Silver Cup in Jersey. And so Connor says there's some instructions in the table. I have to end this and whatnot. And Rachel said, "You're not coming back. Even if you kill him, you're not coming back." And they have a nice little touching moment together. And as he gets into his elevator, he looks back at her and says, "Hey, it's a kind of magic." He reminds her of that moment. And so she has a small tearful smile on her face as she says goodbye, Russell Nash. So then we get to the final fight between Connor versus Kurgan on the rooftop of the Silver Cup building. And he has to also save Brenda, who's also kind of dangling up there. And it's a nice fight. This fight gets brutal. This fight gets wet. This fight gets all of it, man. It's probably Connor and Kastagir having a night on the town. It was a volcanic eruption that heard 3,000 miles away. Maybe a few more immortals. Yeah. But yeah. So the fight between Connor and Kurgan takes place on the rooftop. Then they fall through one of the top windows and into the building. And Kurgan almost kills Connor. He's like, because he kicks his sword away after disarming him. And he's like, now it ends. And then Brenda's there, smacks Kurgan in the back with a huge pipe. And he smacks that out of her hand with his sword. And so he's like, and then goes to stab him or slice her up. And Connor saves her. He's like, what kept you? And so that's when they have the climax of the fight, where Connor is using speed against Kurgan's brute force. And Connor slices up Kurgan's stomach area and chest. And then they do the final shot. Now, when Kurgan got sliced up in his stomach, realizing that he's basically signaling the last legs of the fight, he opens his eyes and there's a cut where Kurgan's eyes just have very black irises, all black lenses, you know? And I'm like, why did they do that, really? Because it makes no sense. So then he's circling, and Connor has his position marked and whatnot, and Kurgan's like, and then charges him. And Connor takes a swing before Kurgan takes his swing. And, well, Kurgan then sticks up his hand, and as they do a nice little close-up or zoom in, his head turns back and his skin splits like right across his chest. And then we get the biggest freaking quickening ever that looks like it's something out of a freaking comic book, dude. It's like, holy crap. This quickening, or they have what's known as a dark quickening in the series, where Duncan absorbs too much evil and ends up getting overpowered by it. This should have been a dark quickening for Connor, because it lifts him way off the ground, spinning him around. You see his head explode and all sorts of stuff, and then he falls. You see these demonic looking drawing things flying around him, coursing through him. It looks like it is out of a comic book, quite literally, folks. It is so cool. And Connor proceeds to get yellow hair and beat the shit out of Frieza. Yeah, I mean, dude, I was expecting it to happen. Honestly, nowadays I would have. It's like, well, if he's gonna go Super Saiyan. But yeah, and then he falls down, and it goes over to Scotland where he takes Brenda, and she's like, so what is this prize? What can you tell me what it's like? And he has basically the movie is supposed to be it was supposed to be a one-off movie, but it gained such a cult following. Basically, the prize is you have all the knowledge of every immortal inside you. All the knowledge that they have accumulated through time, all of their strength, and even things that you cannot imagine. Like when or even before Connor took Kurgan's head in the zoo, a male lion is eyeing Connor and growling and snarling at him, and Connor looks right back at the lion, and the lion calms down. That's basically kind of how immortals are. There's more of a mythical element in this movie, which I feel was, or could have been very cool if they had done it or kept to that kind of mystical or mythical element in the show as well, but they didn't. So basically, it is implied that Connor becomes mortal, but is also semi-godly. He has all that knowledge, but he's now also mortal. He won the prize. The prize was mortality, but also godly knowledge. Because in the second movie, they were explaining what the prize, or they expanded on the prize, even though they also took it in a weird direction. Because Connor helped the Earth survive the weakening of its atmosphere, which protects us from the sun. So Connor is sort of like an immortal, or no, he's actually more like he's mortal, jack of all casuals. He becomes mortal. It's just that he has godly knowledge, and they expand on it in the second movie. But the second movie was also no longer considered canon because of taking the story in a very weird direction of having them all on different planets and whatnot. So, yeah, that's basically the ending of Highlander. Basically, Connor has his happy ending, and Ramirez does have a nice little because Ramirez is also inside of him because he was inside Kurgan, but Ramirez is now part of Highlander, or of the Highlander's knowledge base. And he's like, "You didn't prepare me for that, you Spanish peacock." And he's like, "Well done, Highlander. You've done well, but it will take time. You now have all the knowledge you ever need." Only the first one is considered canon for me. That is true. I mean, the third one is, or the Final Dimension with Mario Van Peebles, is actually a decent sequel. It's a good sequel to the movie, but it doesn't do well for the canon of the series and the movie. You know? So that is going to lead up to the scoring section of this stream. How would I rate on an objective level, meaning without bias and strictly on the movie's merits alone? This movie is about a 7. There is great sequences, there's great acting, but there's also some writing issues, and a lot of the special effects are very dated. And it does make it a little bit too mystical, but while trying to also keep it grounded. There's just a lot of things that could have, or some of the practical effects that they used were exposed during the filming. So it does get some marks down. However, subjectively, this movie is pure 10 out of 10. I really do like it. I really do like how the story, or what the story is. I love the series. I got the series for $18, all 6 seasons, on digital, when the series on digital is usually $300 plus the whole series. So I got it for a steal, and I'm watching through it. So subjectively, with bias, it's 10 out of 10. Moviegoer, if you like these kind of stories, it's definitely one you can enjoy. It's 9 to 10 out of 10. And Highlander is definitely a movie I recommend that people do watch, get into it and whatnot. It's pretty cool. The second one is god-awful. The third one is okay. But the first one is indeed the best one. And with a couple of problems here and there, the movie still holds up pretty well. After 30 years, definitely a 9.5 out of 10. After 30 years, this movie is indeed that good, yes. 35 years, actually, or 36 years now. But yes, this movie is very good. And I truly enjoy it. So anyway, folks, thank you so much for tuning into this live stream. I do not have any hints yet for the next one, because honestly, I don't know what I'm going to review next for you guys. But trust me, pay attention to my Twitter at OrangeHat2185. I will have some hints out. Make sure you have notifications for me on Twitter and on YouTube, so you could definitely stay tuned for any updates. Also, I have the Predator versus Klingon versus stream coming up this Friday night, so definitely stay tuned for that. And the week after will be, or the Friday stream will actually be on Thursday, because Friday I have to go watch Venom Let There Be Carnage. So Thursday next week will be the Terminator Dark Fate discussion with Chris and others. And then for the discussion streams that I'm doing something special for the Terminator franchise discussion streams. I will be doing a special stream after 2 weeks after the Dark Fate series, or after the Dark Fate discussion. 2 weeks after that, I will be pulling all the panelists in for a discussion of how would we do a Terminator sequel, because we all know that the sequels after Terminator 2, none of them held up very well. So if you like Terminator, if you're a fan of the Terminator franchise, we will be discussing how we would do a sequel in October. And then the next round of movie discussions will be the Tolkien universe, both Hobbit extended editions and Lord of the Rings extended editions. So those will be the Friday discussion streams after the Terminator series. I don't think anyone is an expert on Dark Fate. There are some people on my panel who like Dark Fate, and I have no problem with people who like Dark Fate. I thought Dark Fate wasn't that good. There are some entertaining elements to it and decent or interesting concepts. It's just that the story fell short. But anyway, folks, thank you for tuning into the mystery review of the Highlander. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that jazz. But make sure you leave a like, because I really do appreciate all the support and all of the support and positive energy that you guys have given me over the 2 years that I've been doing YouTube. It is truly wonderful to see. Thank you all for helping. I'm trying to get up to 2,000 watch hours before the end of the year, because I really want to try to get up, or my watch time up, before I get to 1,000 subs. That way it doesn't take people too long to freaking keep just plugging away. It's also why I create the different streams, so I have playlists to make it easier to get the watch time up as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will when I figure out the next mystery review, I will definitely get some hints out for you guys. So this has been Orange Hat Reviews. Stay humble.